Gwen Cheney. I'm a venture partner at Fusion Fund. It's an early stage fund down in Palo Alto. We do seed and A. We actually invest a lot in medical devices, genomics, and robotics. I'm also an EIR at SU Ventures. It's an impact-driven accelerator. And I am launching my own fund in synthetic biology as of this past Tuesday, capping at 10 million. And just within the last couple of days, I already have 3. But I can talk more about that. So I think the question posed to me was more on life sciences. I literally just came from JP Morgan, so happy to give everyone my take on what's changed year over year at JPM.
My name is Thomas Lyle. I'm with Mighty Capital. I'm a principal there, and I'm responsible for all the deal flow and going out and meeting with entrepreneurs to bring them into Mighty Capital. And prior to that, to give you some context why I'm doing that now, is I was a serial entrepreneur. My last company was in the technology space, SaaS space. I raised capital for that and operated that for almost 9 years before coming over onto the investment side. And Mighty Capital, we are looking for both tech and life science. So we've invested in Mission Bio, Fabric Genomics. We invested in medical devices and really interested in pretty much anything going on in the life science space. And as far as connecting with investors, really you got to understand that the investors are working very hard to be out there, and they're casting a wide net trying to meet people. They hire people like myself to go out and do that. So how do you position yourself and your company to be attractive to the investors and get noticed? There's a couple of different ways. Coming out of the life science space, all of you are very, very smart. You're a company, you need to be balanced and not just be too weighted on one end or the other, strategic or research-based. Having that balanced leadership in the company will make a big difference on being attractive and to an investor. Unless you've published and are a famous scientist yourself, partner up with someone who's done that and has name recognition so that they can make intros. So VCs, when they hear, oh, this person's on the board of advisors, this person's a co-founder, they'll pick up the call and talk to you, even if your company at first seems like it's not of great interest. But they'll still meet with you and perhaps you get some traction there. And then do your research. Do your research for your projects, do your research for your investment. It's very important to understand what the VC firm is looking for. Do they like to take entire round? Do they like to lead? Do they like to just co-invest? Understand what their investment thesis is. Look at their portfolio companies, because when you see what they're doing and what those companies look like, that is what success looks like to that VC firm, and every VC firm is different. So if your company doesn't look like what they've been investing in some sort of tangible way, then perhaps that's not the best fit. So doing your research there and understanding who's which firms and investors are looking for companies like yourself.
So our group is about 20 years old now. We started at asset management companies, one of the oldest venture firms in Silicon Valley. Peach Johnson used to be one of the pioneers of venture capital here. You may know this name. And Helix Ventures is a spin-off from asset management, which we accomplished in 2009. Invest only in life sciences, medical devices, biopharmaceuticals. Have been behind some of really good exits in the industry. And actually, Casey asked me to talk about exit strategies, IPOs versus M&A, acquisition by big medical companies. So if we start with IPOs, IPOs cannot be considered actually as exit strategy. IPO is not an exit event. IPO is the financing event. And companies go public to raise money for the activities, for the clinical programs. In fact, for investors and the founders, it means that they will be diluted with the IPO, and their stock will be locked up for 6 months or more. So it actually extends your investment period, investment holding, but also introduces a lot of uncertainties, because there are so many factors in the public markets that you no longer control, even if you're on the board. And stock starts going up and down, and in many cases, it goes up and you cannot sell your stock because you're still locked up, and then it all falls, and you don't want to exit because you You want to wait until it grows up again, and you become greedy, but it's not growing, so you lose money, essentially. And in many cases, you're stuck in that public company for many years, and it reduces your IRR, and not very helpful. Not to mention that managing a public company is a big pain, and many of the people who have managed public companies know that. So, in summary, it's not a perfect exit strategy for entrepreneurs and for investors. M&A, on the other hand, is much more preferred, at least from the investor perspective, because in many cases, you get liquidity immediately. Sometimes it's structured as a stock acquisition, sometimes you get stock, sometimes you get cash. Most of the time, there are milestone payments involved, so it's extended over a long period of time. And the more upfront you get as an investor and the founder, the better off you are. In many cases, the founders are required to stay with a big company. Sometimes it's for a year, sometimes it's a couple of years. Most of them leave the company. The next day, their period is over because they don't like the environment of large companies, the entrepreneurs. For investors, it means that sometimes all the risks that could be realized beyond our investment horizon we're not exposed to them. I've had situations when we received significant upfront payment for our investments, and then the big company failed the clinical trials, and the drug died. Essentially, we realized our investment, we made money on it, we returned money to our limited partners, but the project failed. So what I'm saying is, even though the drug development process takes 10 to 12 years, and it takes hundreds of millions of dollars, from the investor perspective, your investment period is much shorter. And actually, in the recent years, it became even shorter than before. In the past couple of years, medium time from the inception to an IPO or to an acquisition was about 2 to 4 years, which is the lowest ever. The typical holding period in the past was something like 6 or 8. Now it's much more attractive for investors to do deals like this. So I guess I'll pass the microphone on. We can talk about it later.
Well, that was a nice overview and also very educational for me. And I always say to my other friends, IPO is not an exit, as you have really nicely pointed out. And it's not a liquidity event. And there are difficulties with the public companies. I'm playing basically in the angel space. And if you actually look at the angel space, the IRRs, the internal rate of return, if you believe the World Bank report that has analyzed 1,100 exits in early startups, it is actually at a 2.7x multiple after approximately 4 years. And it's an IRR of about 27%. And that's the average. And when you if you're an investor and you're doing proper due diligence and you spend your time and you have some domain expertise, then the average exit multiple goes up to 5.8. That's a big deal. With it 5.8 after 4 years, that is something. And this is actually outperforming usually venture capital. And it has to do with And this is actually across all technologies. That's true for high tech, clean tech, life sciences, and other technological areas. And so coming back to the angel investment space, I'm the chair of the Life Science Committee at the Corazza Forum here in the Northern California chapters. And we see all sorts of deals. We see about a third real estate deals, which is unusual for an angel group. That's particular to Corazza. We see about a third of high-tech and fintech consumers technologies, and about a third in life sciences. And the unique thing about the Karatza Forum is that we have expanded to be a global network with over 50 chapters globally, with 3 major regions in the United States. Pacific Northwest is now the largest region, Northern California and the Mid-Atlantic chapters. And overall, globally, we usually invest about $70 million annually into early stage companies. And this can be seed funding, that can also be Series A funding and later, but usually we are actually playing in the angel space. And one of the unique part of Karatza Forum is that before we make an investment, we form due diligence groups. So I've led a couple of due diligence efforts. I'm currently leading a very interesting deal on S2 Genomics, which is a very interesting company that feeds into single-cell genomics that may be of interest for you. And so tomorrow is our kickoff due diligence meeting. If you are interested, let's talk afterwards. I think that's actually an interesting company. In the due diligence reports, we have usually a team of 5 to 6 to 10 people. We distribute chapters on the team, on the technology, on the market need, on the IP, on the corporate documents, and on the deal terms. And we meet usually in weekly intervals and write this all up together. And if I'm leading the due diligence, then it often results in a 50 to 100-page report that is then helpful for the company in order to also raise further capital. In about a third to half of the cases, we find something that I would call a red flag. And what we then do is we just stop with the due diligence, and there will be no due diligence report. So in a way, having a positive due diligence report, at least for the Northern California chapters, where I can say we have very high quality, is something like an endorsement that this company is a potential investment opportunity for early stage investors.
So I have to say I'm extremely amazed. You have about 4 years to exit. You are also in about 4 years range. And I try to teach every entrepreneur, it's actually 8 to 12. So, because I don't believe in overnight sensation. So one of my companies was acquired by a company called ArcSight. From the day of founding the company to the exit $1.5 billion acquisition by HP was precisely 12 years. They went after 10 public, but had 2 more hard years with stock prices going down and coming back up again to get their dream exit going at one point in time. And as an entrepreneur, you will see that 1.5 sounds like a big deal, but the real winners are the investors, and especially the later stage investors, and not the early angels at that point in time. I also was part of a multiple round deal which taught me the golden rule very well. So if you think you have an investment contract, later stage investors come in. Let's see, you're an angel investor, you are a later stage investor. Anybody, including the acquiring company, which in my case Intel did, they said, forget every single term sheet that was in the play, every single investment round that was in the play, this is what we want. You give 50% of the acquisition capital to the employees, otherwise we don't acquire you. End of discussion. You either accept the terms or not. So all the 2x, 3x, you had a choice. And I told actually all the investors, I was on the board of directors, you have a choice. You either put $120 million into the company to further the development of what they're doing, or you sell to Intel and you will have a 1.1x. Guess what they all choose? 1.1x. They didn't have the guts to go further after they had about $180 million in to put just measly another 120 in. They would have gotten actually 5, 6x if they would have had the understanding correctly. But these are the rules of the game. The rule is the golden rule. Those who have the gold rule. Yeah, that's what the golden rule is. Now, corporate innovation. I have to say, who is in the startup here? None of them in corporate world, right? Not a corporate innovation that you potentially spin out. All in real startup. You know that you're ahead of the game? Yes, you don't have as much money as a corporate. That's probably the only advantage. But you have corporate rules. Can you make contracts as you can easily start a POC as you can do in your little startup company in the corporate world? I have learned the hard way helping a big corporate to spin out. Everything is against you. One example, would you be happy if you had a POC going, a customer that gives you every single year $500,000? Would you send him away? The corporate did. They said, we cannot renew the contract because we don't know what we are going to do with this. Do we shut it down? Do we spin it out? We do not renew the contract. They sent the customer home. We got to a VC meeting and he said, do you have actually successful customer traction? Yeah, we do, but we don't any longer. And then you are in the explanation area why it actually didn't happen. The rule system of big corporates, and it's a good news for every startup, the rule system of the big corporates is so impeding. And the management quality is so impeding to an entrepreneur. I have seen many startup companies, I was part of two, where ex-IBMers came and wanted to work big there because they were from the big corporations. They don't survive in a startup world because they didn't have a secretary. I know, the first startup company in the US, at nighttime, 7 p.m., we packaged the FedEx packages. CEO, CTO, and myself, VP of Sales and Marketing. That's what we did, that we had to do to actually make it happen. And after 4 years, we exited. We really had an exit, M&A, preferred, actually several times in my life. I was one time lucky, 1.5 years. But that is not the rule, that is the exception that you make it happen at this level. So I would like to include the audience in our question, but I have one initial question for all the seasoned institutional or private investors. I have not understood what the love affair is with crypto. The only thing I actually heard is, I have immediate liquidity. You have no connection to the value of the company because the crypto ICO is isolated from it. So would you subscribe that you would actually be an ICO investor then instead of a stock investor in the company, only to get quicker liquidity? All the way through.
I wouldn't.
No way. Yeah.
We wouldn't, but I guess there's a new vehicle, an ISO, a secured one that we would consider, but not an ICO.
It's not my area of expertise.
So in the medical field, you're all in the medical environment. We heard a very elaborate presentation earlier. I have spent the last 3 years, and Casey knows this, into what I call functional medicine. Functional medicine are products like montmorillonides, bentonides that have tremendous impact. NIH has research about them. We have a company that pitched here, Sumavedic Disc. I have one now. It treats my tinnitus, believe it or not. And but I hear always in your investment theory that this is not anything you would go into. You would only go in traditional ideas. Why is this so?
I wouldn't say that I would only invest in something that is mainstream and that is consistent with the traditional medicine, the Western medical approach. I wouldn't say that. In fact, last month, 2 months ago, I met an interesting company that has deuterium-depleted water to treat cancer. I looked at this. It's a company out of Hungary, and they sent me data, they sent me the slide deck, and it looks like there's really something there. And I was really surprised. So we are now in conversations because we have a functional profiling assay. I could very well imagine that whether this would work or not may depend on the individual patient's tumor. So that may actually go very well together with our technology. However, upon further research, one of the challenges is, where's the IP? And how can you commercialize it? What do you need to create barriers to entry? And where do you get the funding from doing clinical trials? And so there can sometimes be in non-traditional approaches, can be unconventional business challenges that are, for example, how do you create a reasonable barrier to entry so that the investors can actually get the money back and that this solution can be monetized so that there is enough drive so that it will eventually benefit patients. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
Well, this is actually a very good explanation. I don't know if I need to add anything to it, because it's not just whether we invest or we don't invest in functional medicine, because we manage other people's money and we have to realize return on investment. And for many reasons, you turn down companies that cannot provide adequate protection, that cannot target markets that are billion-dollar plus, that cannot address some urgent needs, and you believe there will be pull from the market. So for all those reasons, those types of companies do not always enter our pipelines. That's one thing. The other thing is, for every single venture group, there is an investment strategy. There is a sort of investment thesis which they used for investing. Some of us invest in, let's say, devices. Some of us invest in drugs. Some people like neurological diseases. There are groups that prefer oncology. So we are focused, in many cases, we are focused on a specific area of medicine, and we try to stick to it. Sometimes it's even written in our PPM. So it's kind of legally binding. So for many of us, it's not even a question to invest in something like that.
I think for us, it's a matter of the team, the partners on the team, understanding the space and what would an exit look like? Who would be the acquirer? What would be the eventual outcome for liquidity? And if we don't have connections in the space, understand how that space would work, then we'd have to take a pass on it. That it would just be too risky to put money in and be passive and just kind of cross our fingers and hope something happens, something good happens. We like to be a little more active and help the company scale. And again, if it gets outside of our area of expertise, or either our partners or their direct relationships, then we don't like to go in that area.
Yeah, I'm echoing the same answer. You mentioned, why do you not have a love affair with functional medicine? I don't even define things by terms. I have a love affair with probability of success and payoff, right? And however that's defined by sector, I'm agnostic. And it just happens that my expertise right now is in synthetic biology. I have a deal with a foundry. It's a unicorn, and they're going to operate at cost for my portfolio companies. They're going to tell me what's the probability of success. And I'm lining up buyers for vaccines, for CAR T therapy, for collagen, even at the JPM conference, so that I have a buyer for my portfolio companies before they even make the products, right? And so, Chris mentioned even for Keiretsu, angels have much better outcome when they have an area of expertise, when they do due diligence. And so I think it's just, what do you know? You know your circle of competence, you know where that edge is.
At this point in time, I would like to get the audience interjected.
Okay, I'll ask a question. I have a question for Gwen. I really love that you are part of SU too. I love SU. I attended Singularity a couple of years ago. That's where I met Naveen Joy. And he was keynote in our first event in LA, where Axel was there too. This was several years ago. So love the mentors there. How can companies maximize shareholder value and create an impact at the same time? How can they balance this paradox?
There are a couple ways, right? And so I think the Nobel laureate actually mentioned one way with when it comes to pharma, which is you have a certain period of time where you are allowed to have a premium price to compensate for your innovation, for your R&D, so that there is incentive in the system for people to do R&D. If there isn't, then innovation sort of stops, right? But after that period, do you lower your cost down to, essentially cost to benefit the world? And you're sort of seeing that across many different types of, whether it's medical devices or whether it's pharma. So pharma already has that, but even for medical devices. So I know the creator of LiveStraw. Right, so if you buy LiveStraw from the US, it costs you a lot more than what he's selling in Africa. So, I mean, that's another differentiating factor that you can do is, depending on the address of the buyer, have a price differential.
Another question from the audience. Anybody?
Oh. Especially people who are pitching, they should ask a question.
Yeah.
Or we want you to ask a question. My question is, how does a startup entrepreneur with very limited resources balance speed of execution and raising more capital versus taking it slow to make sure we validate and get the product?
So the problem is that even in life science, and I would like to get the panel's feedback as well, I perceive the problem to be much stronger than in many other startup companies. Because when we always talk about does a dog eat the dog food in the normal startup world, you need to actually prove that you have actually a product and not the theory that you are trying to bring to market. I find raising funding on a pure idea is even 4, 5, 6 times harder in the life science field than it is actually in the normal product field. But the one thing that I have seen that all entrepreneurs make the same mistake, when they have access to funding, they are afraid of losing a major stake in the company, and they don't understand. Take the first round and take enough, because if you are with your back against the wall, because you didn't raise enough, then you are under much more pressure and have more difficulty. So I rather lose a big stake for the right amount of money so that I for 2 or 3 years can actually start executing the company.
I agree. There's something else. If you, in life science, not only it's more difficult to raise on an idea, the investors also want to have some reassurance that this will work. So if you actually in-license some IP from a university, especially from one of the top universities, people love it. If you develop your IP your own, people are more reserved. So the building strategic alliances and think about, is there any IP that comes from a university that actually there is something there? The challenge in life science is actually potentiated with the fact that it takes so much resources to create evidence, to create actually a prototype. And that's the reason why I think if you have something in life science, what you need to do is you need to think about your network. You need to think about the people you want to partner with. You need to think about who can do what, who is the best in the field, and then you need to have a very thoughtful discussion with, have you worked with these folks before? Can this work together in terms of personality? Can the people really perform? And you need to have an agreement in place that if one of them doesn't perform, that you can actually split up, and how you will manage challenges if somebody doesn't work out, so that people are nevertheless feel okay and there are no disappointments on neither side. So the transparency, having a good agreement with other people in place, that's important to get momentum.
Well, I actually think it's an issue of infrastructure, because if you're developing some software or consumer product. All you need is a few computers and a couple of programmers sitting together and writing the code. Or if you're developing a medical device, for example, you can do it in your garage. But you cannot develop a new drug or a new genetic technology or something like that in your garage, because you really need high-end, state-of-the-art equipment and lab space and a bunch of scientists and probably vivarium and all these kinds of things that are required for early-stage preclinical development. And the only way to do that, I believe, is at some university or academic institution that could provide that infrastructure. And this is not the stage where you can get funding from either angels or VCs, because the level of risk is huge, and nobody would put their money in. So typically, those companies and those ideas are financed from the grants. And there are plenty of grants in this country. Only NIH finances something like $30 billion a year. And there are private foundations, there are grants at the university, so you can go to so many sources to finance a project like that. And I think that's the right thing to do, because you cannot go to private investors with an idea, because you at least need to have a proof of concept.
Yeah, so adding on to that, once you're at a stage where investors could come into play, understand who your target investors are, whether it's angels or even into early stage VCs, micro VCs, understand what they're investing, what stage they invest in, and get clarification before you're going and doing pitches and spending time prepping and going all over the valley to meet with people. For us, we're usually closer to either commercialization stage or approaching into phase 1 trials before we're really getting excited about a device or a drug or what have you. So understanding that, so you're not wasting time and resources.
So the general advice is you raise funding for 18 months, right? But that's only because it takes about 6 months to close a round, so people don't want you to be fundraising continuously. But that's usually for software companies, right, where you have linear growth. And so if you're doing anything with life sciences or FDA approval, you're more of a stepwise function, so the rule doesn't quite apply to you. The way I would think about it is laying out a plan of what metrics do you need to hit to get the next round. And so I've sort of tried to, I know this problem, so I've tried to solve it for my portfolio companies, and the way of solving it is I'm stepping in as their free CFO. I'm actually telling them, from what I know from my VC network, this is what they're looking for to raise your next round. You gotta hit these for me to get you money for the next round, right? And so then that's how we plan out, this is how much you need this round to get to your next metrics. The other thing is, so I wish you were a synthetic biology company, because the problem I've identified there is to genetically modify a organism, you need about 10 to 14 million, which is way too much for a seed company. But what I've done with my partner is we negotiated 250,000 chunks with this particular foundry to show sort of a pilot that this can be done, which gets them the next round, right? And so if you can find whether it's an angel or whether it's a group that will be a great partner, because right now if you're begging for money, you'll take any check, right? But if you have a choice of checks, advice and partnership is even more valuable than money.
Years ago, I read an article when I was an advisor to a life science fund that the trend at the time, it's probably 6 years or so ago, was that the startup company should make an early alliance with a potential exit partner, a pharma company. It limits your exit, of course, but it mitigates some of the problems. You can get access to the scientists, was the argument. You can get access to the lab space. And they have a first right to basically take the company out when the milestones are hit. What is today's vision to this?
It depends.
Well, it depends. I would say you need to be careful with that. And every time it's a business decision, sometimes it makes sense. But most of the time I find it really tricky because it limits your exits, as you correctly mentioned, and it exposes you, exposes your IP, and you kind of merit to one company, which is not always optimal, because you can get access, if you have money, if you have venture money, you can get access to the lab space, you can get access to the talent. You don't really need that big guy over your head. So I don't think there is much value in it, except some specific cases.
Yeah, so far I agree with what's being said, that strategics coming in, yeah, they bring some tantalizing deals in the beginnings and seems very rosy, but you can sign up for terms that turn off investors down the road. They're going to be potentially on the board or the board observer, so they're going to be in the room when you're talking down the road for M&A time. So it makes for an uncomfortable dynamic at best.
I do this with all of my portfolio companies, so it's definitely a very, very good topic. So I'd say there are two red flags, right? Is if any of these large corporates is a lead in one of your rounds, that's a red flag, because then I wonder what terms did they sign up in that I'm going along with, even in prior rounds. So I will scrutinize all the docs. And number two is if it's an exclusive. So for example, like one of my portfolio companies is talking to GSK, but is it an exclusive such that they can't not sign a contract with BASF in 2 years, right? It's fine to have an exclusive, it's only 1 year. I don't care about that. So, you manufacture the product to their specs, and then next year you can add on a new distribution partner. So I really think about, so these partnerships, whether it's, I only do paid pilots, there are no free pilots, but I actually love these partnerships because it's validation that there is demand. The other thing is, it's free distribution, right? They already have thousands of sales force, so I'm happy to split revenue with them just to use their distribution, because I don't want to hire, a couple hundred sales staff and having to manage them.
So I have a very unusual approach. I initially assume that you don't lie to me about the technology. So then the next, for me, most important step is, how is your market and how you're going to go to the market? Of course, in medical field, it's a little bit different than in most fields where I deal with. But most of the companies I find fail actually on the idea how they're going to sell their first 5 products, how they're going to get to 500 products, what is their competition, why do they have a right to exist compared to the competition, and understanding the market. This is where I have seen for myself the biggest holes in almost any startup company. In the life science field, it's easier to say, although they make the same mistake. I had a company out of Maryland, they had a non-invasive drug delivery system specialized for insulin, and they wanted to address the whole market. And I thought about that there is a better way of addressing the market to understand who has the biggest problem with the typical injection in the body, right? And these are the elderly and the children. So pick one of the 2 markets. I said, no, this is not the biggest market. I said, I don't care. If you control that market, you make enough money to either expand or get acquired.
I agree. So your so your question was actually, how do we do our due diligence, right? When we look at companies. So you can think of it as several components that are relevant. And I mentioned this before, is there really a market? Does it really make sense? Sometimes it doesn't. Often the claims of the impact for the market are overstated. The market size is often overstated. That's the first thing where I think about, well, are they honest with what they're saying? Then of course, I want to understand the technology. Has the technology really a legs? Can it work? Many corporate investors who shy away from life sciences say, oh, it's too risky. What if this doesn't work? Actually, the risk that it doesn't work is actually quite limited, and if you look at the variability on outcomes on life science companies, the risk-reward ratio is often more favorable than other companies, which people are often not aware of. But then there is also the question on, do they have the competency to execute on this? And is there actually can this solution be commercialized? I give you one example. I'm an investor in a company that has some magic sauce where they can look at a chest CT, and when there is a suspicious nodule, they can predict with higher sensitivity and specificity whether this is likely to be cancer or not than a radiologist. How do you market that? Would you say, we have a solution how, dear radiologist, we have a solution how we can push you out of business? No. So what you do is you say, this is a decision support system. Okay, so what are the downstream implications? Well, you actually save costs on unnecessary procedures for patients who don't need it. So this is interesting for a health insurance company, right? Now, is it interesting for a hospital? It's not interesting for a hospital because a hospital actually makes money with diagnostic procedures. So you have suddenly already a key stakeholder in this mix who may not want this technology. Okay, so then you can say, well, perhaps we can speed up the process, how the radiologist can read this. And they say, fine, we can do this, but why should I pay for it if there is no reimbursement code? Well, if you don't have a reimbursement code from the insurance company, why would a hospital or a radiology unit really use your technology? So it depends on the healthcare system and how the reimbursement is. If we are talking about Canada and the UK, where hospitals are budgeted, it could make economic sense. You can actually have a profit-sharing model. Probably not so much in the US. In the US, it could work with the VA, it could work with Kaiser, but with others, there may actually be a real challenge. So when it requires to have some understanding of the market and the economic forces for a company to be commercially successful, for this to benefit the patient. You may have a solution that can benefit patients, but there may be no economic solution in the current health economic reimbursement or incentive system to really make this work.
This was actually a very good description of how you look at the market. I think I'm not going to go into that because it was perfect. What I want to say is that it's very easy to fall in love with a deal. And sometimes we look at the companies and we talk to entrepreneurs and they're very excited. We get very excited. And it's easy to sort of become less critical and try to push the deal through your partnership and try to close on it as soon as possible because you believe you may lose it. And that happens a lot. And so we are trying to be very critical when we go through the due diligence process. We certainly review the market of every single detail. We try to understand all the stakeholders, all the dynamics, everything that's going on, who will buy it. But essentially, you need to answer the question, who cares? Because sometimes there are cool technologies that you cannot sell. And of course, we need to understand the technology. We need to understand the IP protection, how can you create exclusivity in the market. But in my experience, most of the failures have occurred because of the human factor. Mostly company failed. Most of the companies that failed in my portfolio failed because of poor decision making, poor management dynamics, poor relationships. So we pay a lot of attention to the management and do a lot of reference calls. We do multiple iterations of meetings with the management, with people under management, with the developers. We talk to the scientists. So we're trying to understand how strong the company is as a team. But also we're trying to understand how fundamentally strong the company is, because good companies don't get sold, they get bought. And you need to build, even though you're trying to sell it in the future, but you need to focus on building a fundamentally strong business. So you need to make sure there is a strong business model, there is a strong financing process and financing strategy. You have good investors on board. You have a good board of directors. So there are so many things that make the company strong, and we pay a lot of attention to it.
Yeah, so I think they've pretty much mentioned everything I was going to say, but I will add on. We also look at just at the deal itself. I mean, we go through all what the IP is and talk to the employees and what's the management team look like and that dynamic, and go through kind of a similar process, it sounds like. But also, just is it a good deal? If it could be a fantastic drug, fantastic device, it's got great potential, but if the deal isn't good, then it's something really pulls us back. Is the valuation too high for what's what the company is, the revenues or the potential, what have you? What's the time to some sort of liquidity event? Is it 2 years? Is it more like 10 years? So these are things that we're trying to evaluate it as part of our due diligence process, and so my one takeaway and recommendation is focus as a founder, focus on the relationship with the VC and with the investor, whomever they are, and build on that, and don't worry about or don't be too overly concerned of trying to push a very high valuation or other terms that look good at face value but could undermine you in the long run.
So to clarify, are you asking how do we decide whether or not to invest, or the last week when we decided to invest and then doing due diligence to make sure everything check off? Okay. Yeah, I'd say the second, like the very last part, the last week when I'm just doing, checking all the numbers, it's whether or not they've lied extremely, right? And that's, so you don't want to lie, because the value is actually quite small, and we all talk, especially in life sciences or medical devices, it's really small. So I definitely don't recommend lying on your numbers. So that would be the last part of the due diligence. And I think all the gentlemen here talked about the first part of the due diligence really well. I would add the only other part that I look at is who else is on the cap table, who else is in this round, who else is leading, because one example, so people will say, picking a VC is like getting married. It's actually worse than that. It's like a blood relative that you can't get rid of until someone dies, right? So, but that's true even from a VC perspective. I need to know who else is, in this company with me, such that if something bad is happening, I have to talk to that person.
You also mentioned the probability of success earlier, so I was thinking about that as part of the whole evaluation part.
So I'm in a different boat because my partner is a foundry that designs microbes. So I have an area of expertise that is a little bit unfair right now.
Well, generally, if you have multiple products and multiple drugs in the pipeline, you're probably better off going public, because you need a lot of capital to develop. And it gives you more flexibility with respect to corporate partnerships as well, because you can partner different products in the pipeline to different companies and successfully develop all of them, and you can spin off some of them if you want to get them funded. So I still don't fully understand the question, but certainly you have a lot of flexibility if you're a multiple product company.
Talking to startup lawyers, they say that what's most important is what's not on the term sheet. And I'd like you to talk about what's not on the term sheet and what you feel is the most important things that are not on the term sheet.
Gwen, I think you know the gaps in the knowledge. So you answer it and we have to end this part.
I usually put a lot of things in the term sheet because so I'm actually not the best person to. Okay, so the reason why you have a term sheet, the reason why you have contracts is when things go to hell, right? And so that's why you spell everything out. Does that make sense? So if your company is growing faster than you expected, nobody's going to be bitching.
Okay, we have run out of time. Ask Roger. Roger will give you the answer after this.